Hey guys, how are you? I've got the video for this week, and I totally was supposed to do it yet last week, but I just completely spaced, and Laura had to do it, and she's a bit pissed with me right now because of that. But anyway, I'm back this week, and I've got the video. So, but before we start, there's our shop, remember, to support us. There's loads of books and really groovy stuff on there to help you become a great writer. And then on our Redbubble store, there's a huge amount of really, really nice, pretty designs and things that, you should totally check out. I'm going to be getting myself a set of weekday t-shirts. Check those out. They're cool. Anyway, that's that. Oh, also, if you want to support us, just, like the videos, subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. That's also really, really helpful. So anyway, there we go. Done it. I think I'm still a bit spacey. But this week, we are having a look at our second J.M Coetzee novel. So a while back, we did the book Foe, and I explained post-colonial writing. And this week, we are doing one of the big ones. Foe is a bit more obscure, and its message is a lot more South Africa specific, because it's talking about different levels of colonial settlement. But this week we're looking at one that is very much attached to apartheid South Africa, but as I think we'll discuss, you can actually it has themes that you can take out of that and put into a lot of other areas. So it's a really fascinating book, and that is Waiting for the Barbarians. So Waiting for the Barbarians, it's a really striking title. And before we talk about this book, because this title comes from a very particular place, this title comes from an Egyptian poet, C.P. Cavafree. I'm not 100% certain how to pronounce his name, but he has a poem called Waiting for the Barbarians, which is thematically linked to this novel. And so I wanted to read that poem to you before we talk about Waiting for the Barbarians, because I think it will have a bearing on this. So Waiting for the Barbarians. This is a poem from 1904. I think Otterline will talk about Cavafree at some point, so I'm not going to step on her toes. I'm already in trouble with the others enough. Honestly, I don't know. But this is the poem, Waiting for the Barbarians. What are we waiting for, assembled in the forum? The barbarians are supposed to come today. Why is the Senate so idle? Why do the senators just sit there passing no laws? Because the barbarians arrived today. Why should the senators make laws anymore? Once they get here, the barbarians will make the laws. Why did our emperor arrive so early and sit ceremoniously on the throne at the city's main gate wearing his crown? Because the barbarians arrived today, and the emperor waits to receive their leader. Indeed, he's prepared a scroll to give him. On it, he's ascribed numerous names and titles. He's ascribed to him numerous names and titles. Why have our two consuls and praetors come out today in their scarlet and embroidered togas? Why do they wear bracelets with so many amethysts and rings with splendid glittering emeralds? Why should they hold priceless scepters today, superbly engraved in silver and gold? Because the barbarians arrived today, and such things dazzled the barbarians. Why haven't our worthy orators shown up as always, to turn out their speeches, to have their usual say? Because the barbarians arrived today, and eloquence and public speaking bore them. Why so suddenly this anxiety and this confusion? How serious faces have become. Why do the streets and squares empty so fast? And why has everyone returned home so preoccupied? Because it's nightfall and the barbarians haven't come. And some people have arrived from the frontier and said that the barbarians no longer exist. So now what happens to us without the barbarians? These people were a kind of solution. And that poem is where the title of this novel comes from. This novel takes place in an unknown empire, so it's an entirely allegorical novel. Obviously, at the height of apartheid, that was how you had to write. But it also means that this is a novel that is not stuck in a single moment in time. Philip Glass wrote an opera, and he used the iconography and the events of America's invasion of Iraq and Guantanamo Bay in that. So The Barbarians is a novel that is not stuck in time. It's something that moves around because of its allegorical setting, which is its enormous power, really. But it takes place in the empire, this unknown empire, and this frontier town run by or overseen by a magistrate. And into this frontier town where settlers and barbarians, the people that they call the Barbarians, who are essentially the indigenous people of this empire, of this land that they're on, that this empire has expanded into. Into this little frontier town comes Joel, who wears sunglasses. He's a man, nobody has seen sunglasses before, and it makes him look quite striking. It also makes him look very impersonal, and he's spoken of as the man with black eyes. So in comes Joel from the capital, where he is there to seek out traitors and find out about this potential barbarian uprising. And they go out on raiding parties, and they capture a father and a daughter, and Joel tortures them. The father dies, and the daughter is disabled by the torture that Joel has inflicted on her. The magistrate takes pity on the daughter and goes and takes her back to her people. He brings her into his household as a servant, but eventually, and does have a sexual relationship with her, but eventually he takes her back to her people. When he returns, his interaction with the barbarians is misconstrued by the authorities from the city, who see him as a traitor and have him arrested. Eventually, the barbarian the party of the army, with Joel going out to hunt this barbarian uprising, has failed. They all come back because they found nothing, because, as the magistrate had said, this is their country. They know how to hide better than you know how to find them. And he comes back, and at this point the magistrate has been released into the town and is basically begging. He's no longer the magistrate. Somebody else has his job. And then just as suddenly as the people from the city came and messed up these people's lives, they disappear, and the town goes back to normal, whatever normal is. A lot of people have gone to the capital. The magistrate is reinstated in his position, but now everything is deeply unsettled. And it's a book that it's a small book, and to recap the synopsis is not saying much. The book is in the reading. It's very much a book about, although it was written in an apartheid context, it's very much a book about settler society and indigenous peoples. And it's very much about, as the poem talks about, what will we do without the barbarians? They were a kind of solution. The tension that exists between the indigenous people and the settlers, and the violence that the existence, not precipitated by violence on the indigenous side, but the violence that is created by settler society. And it's not just violence against the indigenous people, it's violence against their own people. This is a book about violence, and although it's not overt, like it's not like reading American Psycho where you're going to have huge, disgusting, graphic violence. It is about the violence that colonialism inflicts on people, not just the indigenous obvious group on whom violence is very frequently and dramatically inflicted, very visible violence, the hunting out for the barbarians, the torturing these barbarian father and daughter. This is not that sort of overt violence, but it's the violence that colonialism does to the settlers. Joel's place there is to oppose, but to also reinforce the empire, to oppose the barbarians, but to reinforce the empire, to basically say, this is what happens if you get out of line. This is what happens. This is the state's violence that we don't care who we inflict it upon. Be grateful that we are inflicting it on these people over here, because we could do it to you, which is what happens to the magistrate. It's at arm's length. It's the barbarians. It's those people over there who the state violence is being inflicted on. So long as you stay on the side of the state, you'll be fine. But the minute the magistrate begins to question what is happening with the state, goes and shows compassion to the enemies of the state. I don't know how much of an enemy of the state one now disabled young woman could possibly be, but in the mind of the state and in the mind of Joel, who is a representative of the state, this is a betrayal. It's a betrayal of the state, the empire, to go and side with a barbarian. And so he is on the receiving end of the violence that the state can sanction and can use to keep people under control. So therefore the barbarians are they're the solution. They allow for that violence to exist because they're an excuse for the violence. The violence is inherent in the system. They are the convenient direction for the violence, but that violence can spew out anywhere it wants to. It's also interesting that the role of the magistrate is interesting because although he does this kind thing, you see the violence in the benign violence. The girl who he has as a servant doesn't want to be his servant. She wants to go back to her people. He is holding her there in spite of the fact that she has no wish to be there. That is a form of violence. He engages in a sexual relationship, which he believes is consenting, but the power imbalance between them is, although she is not a slave, which is the ultimate power imbalance, the power imbalance between the barbarian girl who is utterly dependent upon charity while in this frontier town versus the magistrate, the most important man in the town, there is an inequality of power, and therefore how can she, even though he thinks this is a romantic thing, she is not in that position, and he comes to understand that this was an abuse of his power, but he didn't see it as such when he was doing it. It's a realization that comes to him later. She has wants that are, I want to go back to my people. I do not want to live like this. I was brought here against my will. My father was killed by you. How can I possibly have any feeling towards you, and why should I explain that? So that benign violence, we'll call it violence because it's that when you whether it's racial, whether it's sexual, whether it's gendered, whether it's class, it is a form of violence because it's a using one's power to enforce the behavior of another. So that's a really interesting element. How much of when a settler society thinks that it is doing good without taking into account the wants, needs, or wishes of the people that they are doing the good to, that it's not good then. A good is only good when it is something that the person wishes to have. Otherwise, at best, it's an imposition. At worst, it is a form of violence. So stripping people of their religious practices and imposing a new religion on them is a form of violence. Stripping people of cultural practices and enforcing a new cultural practice on them is a form of violence. The people who did these things in colonial societies thought that they were doing a good, but essentially it was still just as much a violence as the soldiers that go out to kill and capture and torture the barbarians. So it really talks about the fact that if your society relies upon there being an other, if your society relies upon violence holding it together, whether that is benign violence or overt violence, you really have to question that sense of what that culture is. Ideas around reconciliation, these are ideas that every colonial culture has to grapple with. Every settler society has to grapple with. How do we be a society that does not involve this coercive violence towards the indigenous inhabitants of our country? But more than that, it's really interesting because it's about identity. And this is where this book can branch out well beyond the post-colonial, and you can start looking at it in terms of gender or sexuality or race from a non-post-colonial setting, because there are non-post-colonial readings of race. Not every interaction or different interaction is a colonial interaction between racial groups. So if your identity is predicated on this, I'm not this, then that becomes very deeply unstable because you always need the other to reinforce your identity, and you always need that rejection of the other to reinforce that identity. An identity that is secure does not need an outside force to reinforce that identity. So I would say I'm Australian, and that does not need the existence of somewhere else to reinforce that that is what I am. So if the way that you see yourself is involving I am this because I'm not this, then that's a deeply unstable reality. Every single identity implies an outside of that identity. That's how an identity works. But if you go to Europe, an Italian is an Italian not because they're not a German, or a German is a German because they're a German, not because they're, oh, I'm German because I'm not an Italian or I'm not French. There is a solid identity in that because you're coming from, this is who they are. If you ask the indigenous people of any colonial settler country, they are what they are. They're not that because of the settler society. They are what they are. That is a stable identity. And when your identity is unstable, you require barbarians. You require an other. And in order to have another, and in order to negotiate with another, it's going to involve violence, because if you had a stable identity, you would be interacting from a place of stability, and you would not require violence because you would have respect. You would have respect because your identity was strong, and therefore you could respect another person's identity, another culture's identity, without having to change it or challenge it based on how it challenges your identity. So ultimately, in order to get rid of barbarians, in order to get rid of our need for barbarians, because barbarians don't exist except in the heads of unstable identity. In order to get rid of that, one must have a stable identity, a stabilized identity, which does mean coming to grips with the inherent violence of the unstable identity. Because only then can you meet with a mutual respect where your existence does not threaten my existence, and vice versa. So that, guys, is Waiting for the Barbarians. I hope you read it. It is an excellent book, absolutely excellent book, fascinating book. If you listen to the Philip Glass opera, that's also worth having a listen to, because it's rhythmic, it's pulsing, it is some amazing music, it's some excellent music by him. But definitely read the book. It is a fascinating book. I highly recommend it, and I will be back later on with another book. So peace and love, guys. Peace and love. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.